So this year is the 50th anniversary of Pink Floyd's Magnum 1973 opus, The Dark Side of the Moon. Now, most music lovers know this record inside and out, me included. I bought it brand new at the University Cellar in Ann Arbor while I was visiting my older brother at the University of Michigan. And I bought it based on the cover, right? That prism and the color spectrum, and because I already knew and loved the Pink Floyd Metal album. I still remember how eager I was to get home, put it on the turntable, and listen to it for the first time in headphones, of course. And it lived up to every hope. I mean, I remember when the heartbeat, the voices, and the sound effects of Speak to Me washed over into Breathe with David Gilmour's spacey lap steel guitar. I mean, epically beautiful. So Dark Side of the Moon set the all-time record for time spent by an LP on the Billboard 200 chart. 972 weeks in all. That's over 18 years on the charts. So it's not just one of the most successful progressive rock albums, it's one of the top albums in any genre. It sold over 15 million copies in the US, more than 45 million globally. So I've been expecting a lot of hoopla to celebrate Dark Side's 50th this year. And there's a box set coming out later this month. It's going to combine vinyl and CD remasters. It's going to have a 1974 live performance. It's going to have surround and Dolby Atmos mixes, 160-page hardcover book, a songbook, 7-inch singles, other collectibles. And there's a Dark Side animation competition for people to make music videos, and the album has all these special planetarium shows happening globally. So this is exactly what I would expect. One thing I did not expect was for any member of that original quartet, I'm talking about Roger Waters, David Gilmour, Rick Wright, and Nick Mason, I didn't expect any of them to re-record any of the material with the intention to release an entirely new version of Dark Side of the Moon. But then I saw this article in Guitar World. Hear the first snippet from Roger Waters' reimagining of the Dark Side of the Moon. Really? I mean, most fans know that Roger Waters was Pink Floyd's sole lyricist, and that he wrote quite a bit of their music too. And he was also the bass player. He was a singer, especially on the later albums. But as far as the audience is concerned, Pink Floyd was much more than Roger Waters. I mean, the other members played crucial roles in the sound and the whole experience. Nick Mason was an innovative and subtly impressive drummer. Rick Wright was a multi-instrumentalist and a jazz lover, and he knew jazz chords. He had a knack for writing these lyrical and memorable keyboard parts and surprising chord changes.
There's a certain chord which is... That is totally down to a chord I had heard on actually Miles Davis' album, Kind of Blue, which is that chord. That chord I just loved.
And David Gilmour grew into a full-blown guitar hero, right? His solos were exploratory, and they gave the Floyd's music just this kind of grandeur. It was really a key part of what made so many fans just rabid about them. So Gilmour was also the main singer on Dark Side and Wish You Were Here. And after those Gilmour sung albums, then Roger Waters started exerting more control, and he was singing lead more often on albums like The Wall and The Final Cut. That's one of the reasons I don't like those albums quite as much. I just like Gilmour's voice, and it blends beautifully with Rick Wright's voice on harmonies. They almost sound like brothers to me. So Waters was the concept guy and the wordsmith. And when he left the band in 1985, he assumed it would fall apart. But it didn't. Gilmour and Mason were determined to carry on. So Waters tried to legally dissolve Pink Floyd in 1986, but the court wouldn't agree. And then in 1987, Waters reached this very reluctant agreement with the other guys. And he says he agreed under duress because, quote, the financial repercussions would have wiped me out completely. All right, almost 20 years of rancor later, in 2005, all four members buried the hatchet just long enough to play one charity show together for Live 8. This is like 24 minutes of bliss for Floyd fans. You can watch it right here on YouTube. Now, after Live 8, they were offered $150 million to tour the US together. But get this, the rift between Waters and Gilmour was so deep, they refused to tour and share a stage despite that guaranteed massive paycheck. All right, time moves on. Sadly, keyboardist Rick Wright dies in 2008, and that ends any hopes for another full band reunion. 2018, Rolling Stone magazine interviews drummer Nick Mason. They ask about the Waters-Gilmour feud, and he says, "I actually get along with both of them, and I think it's really disappointing that these rather elderly gentlemen are still at loggerheads. I think the problem is Roger doesn't really respect David. He feels that writing is everything, and that guitar playing and singing are something that, I won't say anyone can do, but that everyone should be judged on the writing rather than the playing." So that's a great insight into where Waters' head is, right? He's the concept guy, so he assumes these works wouldn't or can't exist without him. And he's partially right? Those specific works couldn't. But, you'd think he might have learned over the years watching Pink Floyd go on successfully without him that a group is more than any one person's contribution. It just doesn't seem to have sunken in. So here we are. It's March 2023, and it's been almost 40 years that Water and Gilmour have been sparring over the Pink Floyd name and the social media accounts, and I think most importantly to them, who deserves credit for what. So this really comes down to an argument of egos about who should get credit for the LPs they released during those concept album years from 73 to 83. For me, the apex of Pink Floyd as a collective is 1973 and Dark Side of the Moon. Okay, I want to get back to that first snippet from Roger Waters' wholesale reimagining of Dark Side of the Moon. Over the years, he has claimed, quite loudly, that Mason, Gilmour, and Wright have gotten too much credit for Dark Side. Here's what he said just last month in The Telegraph. "I wrote Dark Side of the Moon. Let's get rid of all this we crap. Of course we were a band, there were 4 of us, we all contributed, but it's my project and I wrote it, so blah." That's playground talk, Roger. All right, here's another quote. "Well, Nick never pretended, but Gilmour and Rick, they can't write songs, they've nothing to say, they are not artists, they have no ideas, not a single one between them. They never have had, and that drives them crazy." Okay, I want to parse Roger's claim by looking at the track listing from Dark Side of the Moon. It says right at the top, all lyrics are written by Roger Waters. And that's definitely a huge factor in what makes Dark Side a great concept album and, a social statement that connects with so many people. But reality check, right? Your concept and lyrics alone wouldn't have spent 18 years on the Billboard chart. Dark Side of the Moon, like other classic concept albums, is kind of a mystical result that's greater than the sum of its parts. I believe this music happens to be timeless, right? It's emotional, it's powerful, and that's because of all 4 members of the band. And some musical guests like Dick Perry on sax, and an incredible group of female singers, including Claire Torrey. All right, so who wrote the music? Well, it must be Roger Waters, because he says Gilmour and Wright can't write songs and they're not artists. So let's see. Speak to Me, music credited to drummer Nick Mason. The gorgeous opening song Breathe, credited to Wright and Gilmour? Not Waters. On the Run, which is mostly a synth loop, is Waters and Gilmour. Time is credited to all 4 members. Great Gig in the Sky, Rick Wright, with an amazing improvised vocal from Claire Torrey. Now, Money is the first song credited completely to Waters. Now, he must not have needed the other guys to make it a hit. Let's listen to his demo of the song prior to the contributions of the other 3 guys.
Money, get away. Get a good job with more pay and you're okay. Money, it's a gas.
Now, obviously, those guys didn't contribute anything. They were irrelevant to the song becoming a hit. Of course, I'm joking. The collaboration is what took Roger's good raw materials and then made Money into an all-time great. And David Gilmour's guitar solo, made it rock. Us and Them. Powerful song. Well, that must be Roger, right? He did a whole tour called Us and Them, and he's released a whole series of LPs and CDs and DVDs and Blu-rays. Oh, not so fast. The music was written by Rick Wright. Any Color You Like? Gilmour, Mason, and Wright. Not Waters. And then finally, Brain Damage and Eclipse, both written by Waters. So, total of 10 tracks. Roger Waters has full or partial music credit on half of those. But I think most listeners would agree that that other half are essential to the whole. Breathe, Great Gig in the Sky, Us and Them. I mean, really, it's the music and melodicism of those tracks that are a huge part of why Dark Side is so well loved. So let's compare. Let's remind ourselves what the original Us and Them sounds and feels like.
God only knows it's not what we would choose to do. Forward we cry from the rear and the front rank die. General sack and the lines on the map move from side to side.
Now let's compare it to Roger Waters' new reimagining.
God only knows it's not what we would choose to do. Forward he cried from the rear and the front rank died.
Gonna want to hear more about
The general said, and the lines on the map moved from side to side.
I don't think it's going to spend 972 weeks on the charts, but what do you think? Look, I've been snarky in this video on purpose. I don't know Roger Waters or David Gilmour, and I'm sorry they can't get along. But reading Roger's belligerent statements makes it pretty obvious why. I mean, he actively wants to take away credit and downplay other people's roles in a collective project that made him and Pink Floyd a massive success. I just don't see any evidence of gratitude there, right? And maybe David Gilmour doesn't feel grateful either. I don't know. But I think all of us as musicians can learn from this kind of endless, miserable bickering of Waters and Gilmour. These disagreements seem to center on how we define an artist and a songwriter and how we choose to share or hoard credit for a collective endeavor. You know, so for thousands and probably millions of musicians like me who toil in relative obscurity, you know, their whole lives, and we can only wish for a tiny slice of Pink Floyd's success, this whole bickering over who did what on an all-time classic album that's generated millions of dollars for each member of the band, it just feels petty, right? I mean, making music as a group is part magic, and there's something spiritual about it. And to my ear, Dark Side of the Moon is an almost religious musical experience, right? It's really unlikely to have had the same magic if you replaced any of those four members, or even the recording engineer, Alan Parsons, you know, because he's the guy that, for example, had recordings of clocks that were used at the beginning of the song Time.
I was commissioned to record some clocks for a sound effects record for the very early days of Quadraphonic.
When we were doing Time, he suggested we might like to have these clocks.
He's the one who recommended Claire Torrey for the vocals on The Great Gig in the Sky. You know, there's no doubt he made the album sound excellent. So hey, sorry to break it to you, Roger, but those other three members of Pink Floyd are and were artists, and your brilliant words would not have had the same social or cultural impact without their musical contributions, which lent meaning and impact beyond the words themselves. Now, as for this new Roger Waters solo version of Dark Side, you know, I'm always open to and intrigued by reinterpretations of an artist's earlier works. There's some cool examples out these days. I mean, Cat Stevens has done some cool remakes. Taylor Swift, of course, is remaking her whole catalog. Listen, I hope I'm wrong, but based on that first Roger Waters snippet, it just sounds tired to me, you know? It's kind of the musical embodiment of an oversized ego and decades of bitterness. You know, it's no fun and kind of sad. Till that comes out and I can listen with an open mind, I'm going to go back and enjoy the power and creativity of what the real Pink Floyd collective created in 1973. I mean, still incredibly moving and relevant 50 years later. What do you think? Please leave a comment. See you next time, or check this out.